Hey, it's Owen, and I'm going to talk about how to get your data out of a Google spreadsheet and use it in your project. So I'm working roughly from the Learn JavaScript topics data document, and it talks about the different types of data collections you'd have, both as deserialized data in JavaScript and external data that you would import into your JavaScript, like tabular data, like CSV or a spreadsheet, hierarchical data, like Json. And it talks about how to use external data and issues you would have, as well as how to get that external data into your project. So I'm going to talk specifically about how to load data from Google Sheets. So I have three methods here, and they go from easy to hard. And the first method is that you can just download it manually. And so in Google Sheets, you choose File, Download, and choose comma-separated values. And then you move the file into your project and import it directly using something like d3.csv. So that's easy to start with, but if you want to update your data, then it becomes kind of a pain because you have to go through that process again and move the file. And so every time you update your spreadsheet that you're using to drive the data behind your project, you then have to do that all over again. So I'm going to show, in this video, I'm going to show method 2, where you make the document publicly accessible, although nobody can find it because it has a very unique URL. And then I'm going to demonstrate how this script that I wrote gets the data, transforms it to JSON, and then writes it to a file, all with one command line. Surprisingly simple method, but there are some specifics. So let's look at the first method. So I have a document here that my partner Joelle is working on for a game or animation project she's still developing. Right now she's just doing these drawings of these extinct plants. And so the first method is that you can just go File, Download, comma-separated values. And so take a look at this in Atom, and we can see that the first 4 rows or 3 rows are specific to notes or something. They aren't a header row. They're just a list of notes and links and stuff for her. The next one, row 4, is the actual header row, and that defines the key for accessing each of these pieces of data. So we would have to, in order to use this with CSV, with d3.csv or any CSV parser, we would first have to download the file, open it, move it into our project, delete those first 3 rows, and then save it again, and then we can import it into our project. But at that point, it's still a CSV, and it would need to be transformed into JSON before it could be used. So I'm going to show the next method. So the first thing you have to do is, and you can see these instructions are written here. You can get this project, install the code, and then you make your Google Sheet publicly accessible and publish to the web. So what does that mean? You go to File and publish to the web. And here's, so I've already published this, but you'll see a prompt in this dialog box that allows you to publish the sheet to the web. And so this means that the spreadsheet itself is published. So if I copy this URL and open it into a private tab where I'm not logged into Google, it'll show you a spreadsheet, not a CSV, a spreadsheet. And so this includes all the HTML that makes up the spreadsheet. This is not really machine readable. It's human readable because it's all embedded in a markup language. So you have to publish it to the web, and then you can use a specific URL to access this file that will then return a CSV. So publish it to the web, and then you enable share. And then you enable anyone on the internet with this link to view it. And so, and again, that's the same link, the human readable version. So it's published to the web and it's shared with anyone on the web. In both these cases, it does not make it visible to everyone on the web because nobody could find it based on this URL. This is so unique that nobody would ever be able to guess this, even a machine. It would take a long time to guess this. It's just like a password basically. So it's published, and you obviously wouldn't want to do this with any sensitive data. But for something like this, we're already publishing our projects on GitHub. It's no issue. So now that it's published on the web, let's go and look at, again, this is in the topics data inside of Learn JavaScript, and there's a link here to this repo where I've been building tools called sample node tools. And so here's the root. It has a basic web page, and then it has node projects. It's got a project that will convert CSV to JSON and write a JSON file. It's got an example that exports Google Sheets from their API, which is actually the third method that I'm not going to show because it's kind of a pain. It's what I had been using in the past, but when I tried to set it up on somebody else's computer, I found that Google had changed all of their tutorial between the time that I did it and a month later when I tried to set it up on somebody's computer. And their interface is such a pain to deal with. Just to create an API and to get the key to be able to use it, it's just entirely complex. So this is why I created this version, which is just to export the data from the publicly accessible version. So here's the package that you'll install. We're just using node fetch and D3 to get and transform the data. And then in this file, this is the file we'll run. And so let's go ahead and just follow along. So I'll move over to terminal, and so I've already cloned this repository to my computer, and I've used GitHub Desktop to open open the terminal at this location. So if I pwd, I can see that I'm inside of my where I put all my repos for teaching, and I'm in sample node tools. So I want to cd into node projects, export Google Sheets, and so we can see the 4 files that I mentioned. The node modules is not tracked, so I'll just remove it so we can start from scratch here. And that removes the folder, and so we'll follow these instructions now. So run npm I to install everything that's listed in the package. Okay, that's done. And now set up your Google Sheet. It must be publicly accessible and published to the web. And then I have another note here to prevent formatting errors. Add a placeholder column with any data on the very last column. So I encountered a strange error that is on the part of Google developers. Maybe they're watching this video. If you are Google developers, for some reason, if I don't put this column on the as the last column with placeholder data, your export SCSV function took the entire first column and made it a single key, and up until about row 40, 45, and then it started to acknowledge that there were multiple columns. So it was a real pain, and it took me a couple hours to deal with, to figure out that the issue was really just that, maybe there's a hidden line break somewhere in here that's causing the issue, but everything is wrapped in quotes, so I'm not sure what the issue was. Anyway, so I think this is a good practice. It basically defines the full length of all the columns in the table. So I think it'll help all the parsers deal with it. And I tried basically every parser I could think of, and finally realized that the problem was coming from the Google Doc. Anyway, so we've installed our code. We've made our Google document publicly accessible. And so the next step is that we have to define the spreadsheet URL. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but first, let's take a look at this. Is what this. So I create an object, and I have a name for reference only, but then I have the ID of the Google spreadsheet, and so that's this number right here. Okay, and then I have the type of data that I want to export, the out. So I want a CSV. I have the sheet name. In this case, the name is time, which is right here. Oops. Times is the name. If you omit this or it's incorrect, it'll just give you the first one, which is this one. So, and then very importantly, I define a range. So the range is, in this case, we start in the fourth row and we go from the first column to fourth row all the way to the n column 100th row. So A4 to n 100, which is more than we need, but it can be I can be certain that I can add data later and it won't cut it off. So, and then lastly, you optionally can add a query, and this actually supports Google's query language for their docs, and you can provide an offset. You can tell it to summarize certain columns. You can do all kinds of things. I don't really need that, so I left it out, but I did kind of make this configuration object that then is creates a URL to access. So when you use this, you'll replace this, and you'll replace this sheet name, and you'll replace the range. Okay, so let's take a look at what this URL once it's packaged looks like. Oh, and incidentally, I do it like this so that I can, let's say I want to test on another project, another document, I can just make a new one. So I can just overwrite the, I have to make it a let. So I can just overwrite the original conf and say like, oh, this is when I was testing the chasing the sun data, and this is when I was testing, another project. So anyway, let's take a look at what this produces. So if we go to a private browser and run it, you can see that it instantly downloads a file, and that's just the browser's function. It's doing what it's supposed to, and there it is. There's the exact same CSV file that we downloaded previously manually, but it's now we have a URL that points directly to it. And if we take a look at it, we can see that it's slightly different. Spreadsheet data. So there's the ID of the of the file. It uses something called gviz. I guess this is for their visualization tool, and you can do the then you could pass the CSV and the sheet or the range if you wanted here too. So, which I do in the code, but I'm not with this example URL. So let's look at how else we might get this this data and test it. And so we're technically using their API, so it's a good idea to be able to test it and not have to download the file each time. So we'll use Postman. And so you can see I've already set this up, and I'm going to copy this URL, and I'll delete the one I made, and I'll make it from scratch. So again, this is Postman. It's if you Google it, you can download software. And I've got several tests in here for teaching and for APIs I develop. And I will add a new request to test. It's a GET request, which is not putting data anywhere. It's just getting a publicly accessible resource. And so it's going to be the Google Spreadsheet, Google Sheet, as CSV, and I'm going to paste in that URL. And when I do, Postman automatically recognizes that there are parameters built into the URL. So anywhere after the question mark right here is considered a separate parameter. So TQX is out : CSV, and so, they interpreted that as the value right there. Sheet is set to times right there, and range is A4 to N59. And so I'm going to change that to A4 to N8, and then I'm going to send the request, and then we'll see the data that comes back in. So this is the body of the response object, and we can see we've got our 4 column, or all of our columns, and then our 4 additional rows on top of that. We can see that it's fairly fast, and there's the waterfall, and the request is okay. We've got some cookies from Google, and these are all the headers. Note also that I don't see it in here, but I'm about to demonstrate. You cannot access this. CORS is set up on this URL, so that means that if we go to a file location, and I'll just go to the README file here, and I'll run everything from. So I'm running from file. This would be like if you set up an index or an HTML page and ran JavaScript from your HTML page and tried to access their API. This is what would happen if you use fetch, for example, which I'll use now, and I'll supply the URL that I just tried in Postman, and then I will take the response object and log it, and we'll see what happens. So fetch is promise based, so it gives a promise, that's pending until the request received a response, and then the response is access to fetch has been blocked by the CORS policy. So Google Sheets has CORS, and so you have to run it on a server. You have to run a test server to be able to access it with HTML, or run it from a node server, which this node script is about to do. And incidentally, if you try to run this from GitHub, I'll just copy this whole thing. Try to run this from GitHub, you'll see that GitHub actually blocks. It doesn't even let you connect to that document. So GitHub is actually blocking CORS requests, which is funny and inconvenient. You can also run it straight from the document. So we're technically running from the document. You can see I ran this earlier, but I'll do it again. So I'll do fetch, and we can see we got the response object with the body and everything. And if I modify the fetch request, fetch then, and I transform it into text, because this is not, typically you say .json to transfer it into JSON if it was a JSON object, but we're accessing a CSV, which is, so we just want to use plain text. And so we'll say then, and then pass that to the response back to, once it's been transformed into, we pull the text out of the body of the response. And so, and there's the text. That is on our CSV. Okay, cool. So let's go now and run this code. We'll take a look at the rest of it now. So we've installed the code. We set up our Google Sheet. We defined the spreadsheet URL, and so now we're ready to use this URL in Fetch. Now I've set up, instead of just using Fetch, I've wrapped it inside of a module so that I can then basically I can import this whole file as a module. So if you're running this in your project, you can make your own node projects folder and then put this folder inside of it. And then if you want to do some data cleaning or some other kind of work, you can then import this as a module if you like and run it. But I'm running it in the file itself. So so this is where the module gets set up, and this is where I define the Getdata method in the module. And it's asynchronous, so we can use await. And so we fetch the URL, and then we get text from the stream in the body of the response. And then we can log the object. So I'm going to comment this one out and just log the object. And great, I think we're ready to, and I'll go ahead and comment these out too. Great. So I'll come back here, and now we can say node index, and I'll run it, and there it is. So now, and again, because I defined the range from A4, the specific header row that I want is there, and we're going to use D3's CSV function to take this CSV and make it into a JavaScript readable file. And it uses the header name or the column name as the keys in each object. So we've got the whole thing now, so let's do that. So instead of logging that, we're going to parse and return the rows, assuming the first row is a header, using D3's CSV parse. So at this point, rows is just a text, it's just a string of text representing a CSV file. So CSV parse will not only deserialize it, but it'll transform it into JSON using the header rows. And then we can access. Here, I'll print the whole thing. So then it returns to the binding that's right here. So CSV will contain the object. I guess technically it's going to be a JSON file at that point. So I should change the file name when I do that real quick. So technically it's going to be JSON data at that moment. So I'll just change the variable name. Okay, and so I want to log the whole JSON object. So again, once it's parsed and transformed to JSON, it'll be returned into this variable. And because we're using await, it'll wait for that to happen, and then we'll log it here. So let's run that again. And so now we can see that all of the rows have been transformed. These are the actual rows that have data, starting with the first row. So it's a JSON or JavaScript object array with JavaScript objects in it. And each column now is the key, and the field in the cell is the value of the key. So that's really great because it means that we can print and access a single row or a single value in that row. So like, I don't know, the plant name on row 3 can be accessed like this. I'll run it again. And so we printed just the object that is in row 1 and the plant name that is in row 3. Cool. So let me format my code a little bit. So that's great. We're done with that. So now the final step here that is essential. We don't really need to return the JSON object here. We're not really doing anything with it, but in case you use this as a module, then you might want to. So here we're going to write the data to a file. And so every time this runs, it'll go get the data, deserialize it, convert to JSON, and then we're going to serialize it. Now that it's a JSON file, we're going to convert it back to a string and save it as a file called .json using the FS file system write file tool. So I'll save and run this again. And it didn't really report anything because I don't have anything. There's no message there. But if we go and look, we can see now that there's a file called data.json, and I can beautify it, and we can confirm that indeed it is a single JSON file that can be referenced. Great. So let's see. So saving the file, and then the final step is that now you have a data file in your project, and so let me just talk a little bit about how you might use that. So here we have a project called SVG Randomizer, which has the exact same code in it. That it's formatted a little bit differently, but it does the exact same thing. And I'm using this as a module. And so in this case, the module Getdata is imported inside of another project called Export Paths. And if you look at that one, you can see that we do a couple of things. I go get the spreadsheet, and then I run the Getdata module, which is everything I just showed you. And then I do some cleaning on it. I do a loop, and I loop through, and basically I decide what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep. She's using this field right here. So if it's included, if there's a 1 here, then these fields will get included. And so we look for that, and if it doesn't include those, it skips them. And then it does some processing, and it makes a new object that's like a kind of a cleaner version where I can store a path to some files. I can get some SVG file names, and then package it all and write it. So let me demonstrate that, and I'll show you how to use it in the HTML. All right, so again, this is a node index. So I'll run it, and I do have a report here. It got 6 rows, and it found 14,000 assets. So it's going to look at all of the SVG files. And this is a project that it just randomizes SVGs, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second, but all these come from drawings that she's making, and there are 14,000 of them apparently. And so I just have the paths and the file names stored. So Great. So and then it wrote that file, but it only wrote the ones that we needed, only the ones that had include on them. And so then we can view the file. And we can't use fetch because it's running on the file system, so I have to run a test server. So I'll do that real quick. I'll go into the test server, and I think I have it set up like this. Uh-oh. Oh, it's already running. Did I leave it open somewhere? Oh yeah. Yeah, I left it open. It's already running. So I should be able to come here and type in localhost. Oh, it's already running on a different. So let me quit that one and go back in to the test server and good. And now when I run it again, we're pointing at the project. So this is an HTML page, and it's pulling in these all of these SVG files, and every time I hit refresh, it's using that data object that I made by packaging and transforming and converting all of the spreadsheet fields, and then it's randomly printing the images. It's a work in progress, but let's take a look at the inside of the main.js file. It is basically very simple. It's going to get that data file, and then it once it has the data, it stores it into the global object, and then it runs the randomizer. The randomizer function is all about the visuals and creating that piece. So I won't talk really about that, but this is how you would use fetch in the browser. It's exactly the same signature and everything. Yeah. So let me back out a second and just kind of talk over what we talked about, which is that we're using this working with data file, which has the instructions for loading data from a Google Sheet. You can download it manually, but you have to convert it. You have to move it around and do all this manual work every time you update it. But if you want to, be able to update your project and then run it instantly and have your data in your project. Here, I'll just. Those are red, so I probably should use some. There you go. So if you want to be able to use data instantly in your project that you're editing on your spreadsheet, you can do it like that. So now I've edited, I've rerun the script that packages the data, and now I've got a whole new set of SVG files that can be run in her randomizer. But you could use the data for anything, obviously. So, so the make it publicly accessible is really the best way. It's, as you saw, it's really easy. And yeah, that's the video.